Welcome to the Law, Finance and Economic Policy Talk Show. We bring you an update from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Central Bank of Nigeria on March 28, 2024, last week, released a circular, and this circular sought to increase the minimum capital requirements for banks to operate in Nigeria. And the increment is quite substantial, and I say so because prior to the circular, what we had was 25 billion being the capital requirement, but now with this new circular, the highest capital requirement is 500 billion naira, and that is for commercial banks that are operating on the international cadre. So what is the need for this recapitalization? The CBN has released a number of reasons, importance of which is that we need this adjustment to be able to absorb the external and domestic shocks. We know what the economy is like from a country level, continent level, and even on a global scale. And it just says that banks need to be more resilient and solvent to be able to cater for this. Also, we have a goal as an economy to get to a $1 trillion economy by 2030, and it's expected that this recapitalization will significantly contribute towards that. Another factor that I'd like to point also is that the CBN has stated that critical sectors need more lending. They need more credit into those sectors for those sectors to develop the economy. And it's only when the banks are adequately solvent that they're able to pump this credit into those sectors that need lending. So these are just a few reasons why this recapitalization has come. Banks have up until March 31, 2026, so about 24 months, 2 years, to reach this capital requirements. But for banks that are just applying for their license, they would have to meet these requirements from the beginning. Now, how does the CBN expect that banks will be able to, increase their capital? The first is just through equity injection into the banks. Another is through mergers and acquisitions. That is two or more banks coming together to combine their business operations so that they can meet the requirements. And another is that the CBN just simply expects that you would downgrade your license if you're not able to meet the capital requirements. But there's also the option to upgrade if you're able to exceed your existing capital requirements. Now, let's look a little at the history of recapitalization in Nigeria. Capitalization is not something that is new. It's since between 1952 to now, there's been about 10-11 recapitalization regimes. The last one was in 2005, and that increased it from 1 billion, 2 billion to 25 billion. And then many years later, we're here now. So when it was increased in 2005, there were also mixed views on it, majority of which people felt that there wasn't enough time for banks to, reach this recapitalization requirement. That resulted in a lot of mergers of banks and, just some banks that were not stable enough dwindling away. So we saw from 89 banks, we went to about 24 banks. So it will be interesting to see how banks are going to be able to raise this equity requirements, minimum capital requirements now, whether we'll also see mergers. One thing I want to note also is that the CBN is actually strict in how banks should raise this. Besides the three methods which we mentioned, which is through capital injection, through mergers and acquisitions, and maybe just downgrading or upgrading your license. What the CBN has also said is that shareholder funds cannot be used for the purpose of recapitalization. Neither can additional Tier 1 capital be used. And additional Tier 1 capital is essentially capital that it's a bond that functions sort of like an equity. We won't go into depth on that. But what the CBN is trying to do here is ensuring that there's actually direct capital injection into the banks, and then you're not just using accounting entries. And when I say accounting entries, because shareholder funds in this case means the shareholder capital, equity, and also your retained earnings. And I'll give an example for why this is significant. We have the biggest bank in Nigeria being Access Bank, and Access Bank has about 251 billion as its share capital, but it has earnings of about 2 trillion. So ideally, if you could use these earnings to account for the recapitalization, it would suffice. But because the CBN has said that this will not be allowed, and it still needs to raise the additional 248 billion. So that's the significance of it. Now, so just a bit more on the arguments for and against. We've mentioned a lot on the reasons why Nigeria would consider recapitalization, but a few other things that, as just been mentioned by the CBN governor, is one, that this will bring in foreign direct investment that we we really need, that foreign currency investment that we need to stabilize the naira, it's expected that the recapitalization would help for the economy to receive that. And also just take into consideration that the last recapitalization was in 2005. That is many years after. It's about 20 years thereabouts after. And then the question is that sufficient enough to cater for the changes when we think about inflation, when we think about the additional economic pressures? It's not enough for banks to thrive now. And we know that capital is essentially the lifeblood of the banks or the banking sector. So we need that increased confidence in the banking sector. And that's one thing that the 2005 recapitalization did, increase trust in the banking sector. But there are divergent views, and then majority of that view, some people feel that it's just short-term liquidity. It doesn't actually create a macroeconomic environment that we thrive, that the banks will thrive in, where they would have high quality assets and good profitability. Also, a study conducted in 2008 post the 2005 recapitalization found that only a few banks were actually better off in terms of improved profitability and operations, and that many banks were actually just the same or actually worse off. So what then is the importance of recapitalization when there are a lot of other macroeconomic factors to take into consideration? So those are just, in a nutshell, just a summary of the conversations around recapitalization. Let me know what your thoughts are. We've seen a lot from the CBN, and this is something else that they've recently released, and all these are in a bid to stabilize and strengthen the economy. What are your thoughts? Let me know. Are you in support? Are you against? What are your views? And we'll be keeping track of the developments and how the banks are able to respond to this. Banks are expected to submit their plan for how they will be able to meet the recapitalization requirements by about end of April of this year. So it'll be interesting to see if we are able to see those and then just track the progress over time. That'll be all for today. Thank you.